بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Inshallah, in today's lecture, I'm going to just take a couple steps back to talk about the last thing that we mentioned in the previous lecture, which was about al-adala, the uprightness of the narrators. And the reason is that one, I kind of rushed through it in the last lecture. I thought I could squeeze it in, but I have a timer in front of me, so I like to keep everything according to the time. So I kind of rushed. And number two, it's very important because he's going to mention a quality about this inner talent, al-malika. And this is something that I want to elaborate on because it's important as it kind of permeates all of the Islamic sciences. So we're going to begin with that, and then we're going to move from there to talk about the type of narrators that we don't accept, which are the narrators that are basically unknown. They're unknown, their inner states are unknown, they're unknown, like their names are unknown, we don't know who they are, they're majahil, we say, we don't even know who they are. And then what are the exceptions of them? Like what if somebody like Imam Shafi'i or Imam Malik or Imam Abu Hanifa says, radiallahu anhum, that these, I heard from somebody reliable. Well, somebody reliable like Imam Shafi'i saying, I heard from someone reliable, that's good enough for us that that person is reliable. So that would be an exception. And then we'll talk about the person who engages in the haram acts or makruh acts and the narration from them. Are there excuses for those acts or are there no excuses? And then following that, to conclude issue 4, which is the issue that we're talking about, we're going to talk about the major sins al-kaba'ir, which is like a lengthy discussion that follows what we just said, because anybody who engages in a major sin, a kabira, knowingly, willingly, will not be able to accept their narration, and it's a big blemish on their character. He's going to go through, I would say, like a medium length list of the major sins. Of course, there are ulama that have elaborated on the major sins and their lists. And of course, there are many hadith, but he's going to give us a pretty healthy list of some of the major sins. It's kind of like a negative lecture, I would say, because I don't like to talk about these things, but we have to because it's part of our deen. So we'll go through the list in some detail, and I'll pick up some of the adillah, some of the proof texts that we find in the commentary to support them, and maybe some examples here and there, and then that will take us to the conclusion of issue 4, inshallah. I look forward to seeing you in the beginning of the next clip, inshallah. All right, so we begin the way we normally begin, which is to turn directly to our text. And like I said, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. قال المصنف رحمه الله ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. Shaykh al-Islam Zakaria al-Ansari, he says, may Allah Ta'ala have mercy on him and may we benefit from his knowledge in this world and in the next. وشرط الراوي العدالة وهي ملكة تمنع اقتراف الكبائر وصغائر الخسة كسرقة لقمة والرذائل المباحة كبول بطريق. He says, rahimahullah, that the conditions of a narrator is uprightness, al-adala, uprightness, and he defines it, and this is a natural talent, malaka. It's a natural talent to stay away from the major sins and the lowly minor ones, like stealing a morsel of food. Stealing is a major sin, as we will come to see, but if you steal a minor amount, what is below the nisab, which is a word that we use from zakah, then the had punishment is not enacted in that case. And therefore, if you steal something that is below, let's say like this pencil. I went to a store and it's haram, but stealing this, the had punishment's not going to happen for stealing this pencil because it's below amount. But as he said, that's a lowly thing, that you would steal like a morsel of food. I think in the last lecture I talked about, somebody was baking a pie and put them on their windowsill, and you were walking by the neighborhood, you grab a piece of the pie. It's a really low thing. Why would you do something like that? Or urinating while standing, or urinating in public places. Urinating in public places. I'm sorry, urinating in public places. 1 second, let me make a correction there. Public spaces meaning not like a public restroom, but like in the streets. It's a lowly thing. If you have self-dignity, you're going to hold yourself and try to at least hide yourself or not do it out in the open. So anyway, that's the translation. So let's just get into the discussion. The thing that I want to highlight is this idea of It's a natural talent. The highest level of mastery that we have in any science is this natural talent. Different subjects call it different things. In the subject of fiqh and usul al fiqh, he's called faqihun nafs. Faqihun nafs is a jurist, it's like a technical term, the jurist of the self. That means that the stuff that we're talking about is so ingrained in their mind, in their being, it's impossible to take it away from them. They are a mujtahid by definition, by themselves, meaning by every fiber of their being. And that only comes through a natural talent. Yes, you need to learn the technical skills, which is what we're discussing, but it's impossible to, that talent's either you got it or you don't. What distinguishes the great people from those that are good or those who have studied hard, those that excel, those that are masters, they have this natural, I have a natural instinct. Like some ulama of hadith, they call the same level of mastery in the science of hadith, faqihul badan, the faqih of the body. Same idea. It said that the hadith master has a natural sense. There's something wrong with that chain of narration. There's something wrong with that hadith. And you said, what is it exactly? It's just a sense. And then you investigate and you find that there's a problem in that hadith, for example. So this is the type of issue that he's talking about, which is that the person who is upright naturally by themselves will stay away from these type of acts. Not that they are rationally saying, oh, I'm going to stay away from lowly acts. By their nature, they stay away from lowly acts. There's a big difference in that. Of course, outwardly, they would look the same, but inwardly, the person who has a natural talent to stay away from these lowly acts is a person who is going to be extremely consistent in both their public moments and their private moments. So I know this is a little bit of an extra detail that's not in the text and not necessary, for the subject and the course and everything, but I want you to understand this because of how significant it is. The people that narrated the ahadith, the thiqat, those who we rely on, from the Salaf as-Salih, radiallahu anhum, they were like this. They were exemplars. They were morally upright people that naturally would not do anything that was ill-fitting of a person. In some of the books of hadith, you'll talk, and we talked about this, I believe, in the Baiquniya class, that if a man walked, without his head covered, that would be adam al-muru'ah, it would be not a manly thing for him to do. Of course, those type of things change with custom. Those are customary things. But the basic idea behind that is that even when I was growing up in America, it was a, the gentlemanly thing is like your head is covered. But when you walk in the Western context, when you walk into a building or a school or an office, you take off your hat. Of course, we don't take off the hat for the same reason, is that it's out of respect. By the way, it's one of those things where the opposite act stem from the same teaching. In other words, a Muslim man that covers his head all the time. It's not that I out of respect. Not that I put my hat when I'm in public and then I take it off if I'm wearing a Western type of hat. Yeah, you would. And even because I grew up that way, when I wear a Western hat or a baseball cap or something like that, my instinct is I'm not saying that I'm an upright person. I hope I am, inshallah, but I'm just giving you an example. My instinct is when I walk into a building, I take it off because it's rude. It's considered rude to have a hat on, a Western hat. Anyway, these type of things that we talked about in the Baiquniya class, they're also related to what we're talking about here, which is that these people naturally were like this. They naturally, aib, we say in Arabic, this is rude. You don't do that. You don't put your feet up in front of your parents. You don't put your feet up when there's an older person that walks by. When an older person walks by and you're sitting, you stand and you let them sit. These are natural things. You can do them rationally, but at some point you're not going to be able to do them all rationally because it's an internal disposition. What he's talking about here is naturally this is how this person is. Whether they're narrating the hadith or they're not narrating the hadith, whether they're in a public setting or a private setting, whether they're in the masjid or not in the masjid, whether they're at work or they're in a religious class or a sharia class, they're always going to be like that. And that's that level of consistency that makes them morally upright. A lot of these meanings are lost in the modern world because we think of everything in silos and in black and white terms, so we oftentimes don't realize that here we're talking about naturally these people were good people. And that's why we trust them, and that's why our whole edifice of Islamic learning is something that is sound, Because we trust the people that are teaching us, because they are morally upright people. How do we know that they're morally upright people? Well, because they just naturally were like this. They naturally went to the masjid all the time and to pray. They prayed all the sunnahs. They fasted the extra fast. They read the Quran all the time. They feared Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in their private moments as well as in their public moments. Okay, so this is what he's talking about. It's a natural talent to stay away from the major sins and the lowly minor sins. These people are morally upright. And this is where the spiritual discipline for us, the discipline of tasawwuf or tazkiyah or akhlaq, al-raqa'iq, is part and parcel with our external sciences, like in this case, Usul al Fiqh, or technically the narration of the hadith, etc. It's one and the same thing. They're two sides to the same coin. Okay, let me move on from there. That's sort of some of the commentary that I wanted to give you about what we were talking about. And then he says, rahimahullah, فَلَا يُقْبَلُ فِي الْأَصَحِ مَجْهُولٌ بَاطِنًا وَهُوَ الْمَسْتُورُ وَمَجْهُولٌ مُطْلَقًا وَمَجْهُولُ الْعَيْنِ. In the dominant opinion, we do not accept narrators whose inner state is unknown, since his uprightness is hidden, as well as the completely unknown person or whose name is not known. Okay, so those are like three things there. Let's take them one at a time. In the dominant opinion, we do not accept the narrator whose inner state is unknown. That's related to what we were just talking about. We want to know how these people were externally and internally. For us, what matters is the Rawi's state before what the Rawi is narrating. And Ash-Shibli Na'mani, rahimahullah, famous Pakistani scholar or scholar from the subcontinent, he has a wonderful, I'm just looking at it in the corner of my eye, he has a wonderful seerah of the Prophet. And this is one of the distinctions that he makes between the Western paradigm and the Islamic paradigm. In the Western paradigm, people care about what is said first and then who said it. They weigh what is said with the weight of the reason of today. For us, it's the opposite. We care about the person first and analyzing the person who's giving us the information, then we critique what is said. And that's why we accept that so-and-so is a sound narrator, but that text that he narrated, there's some weakness in it. We can say that. We don't reject the whole thing. So for us, we need to know the person. We can't be majhul, he can't be unknown, because if the person's inner state is unknown, then we're not going to know if they're upright or not. So knowing how a person is, how their tadayyun is, how their religiosity is also an important part of accepting a narrator. We'll pick up this discussion, inshallah, in the next clip, and we'll continue what we just started. Okay, so the first thing is, we said in the dominant opinion, we do not accept narrators whose inner state is unknown. Why? Because then their uprightness is hidden. So we need to know if the person is upright or not. As well as the completely unknown person, the majhul, or somebody who we don't even know them at all. He's not known. And in the science of hadith, it would say something like, وَحَدَّثَنِي رَجُل, like a man told me. Well, who's that man? Even when I read, I'm like, well, who's that? I mean, that could be anybody. That's a problem. But I'll get to an exception. I don't want to get ahead of myself. Or somebody whose name is not known. حَدَّثَنِي شَيْخٌ مِن نَجْد. A sheikh from the Najd region told me. Well, who's that person? I mean, we don't even know his name, unknown. So anything this is like the tahrim of riba because of gharar, because of speculation. Any type of transaction where there's a hint of speculation, the Shia will be like, no, that's haram. Because it's unknown. It's the unknownness that makes the transaction problematic. Likewise with the narration, with the science of narration. It's the unknownness, obviously, for obvious reasons, makes us super, super nervous, because then anyone can say anything. As Ibn Mubarak said, Abdullah ibn Mubarak radiallahu anhu said, as is quoted by Imam Muslim in his introduction to his Sahih, Al-Isnadu min ad-din, walawla al-Isnadu laqala man sha'a ma sha'a. The chains of transmission are from our religion, and were it not for these chains of transmission, anyone could say what they want. So for us, verification, as we've talked about in the beginning of our Usul journey, as one of the pillars of one of the 7 major concepts of Usul al Fiqh, at-tawthiq, verification. So if we have somebody who we don't know, or who's unknown, or whose state is unknown, then we become nervous, and then how can we trust that which they're carrying? Why? And remember what Shibli Na'mani said. This is a wonderful concept that he brought. I'm so glad that I benefited from it, and it's one of those things. It's like the gift that keeps giving for me, is that in the Islamic paradigm, we first are concerned with the person who is giving us this information, the state of the sheikh, the status of the sheikh or the sheikha, their external and their internal qualities. Are they following the Quran and Sunnah or are they not? Are they a pious person or not? These things matter for us. Then if the person checks all those boxes, then we say this person is qualified. Now I want to listen to what they have to say. They might say the most ludicrous thing, the most crazy thing, but because I trust this person, then I'm going to think twice, and maybe there's a ta'wil, maybe there's this, maybe there's that. And that's exactly what he says in the next line, in the following. He says, rahimahullah, فَإِنْ وَصَفَهُ نَحْوُ الشَّافِعِيِّ بِالثِّقَةِ أو نفي التهمة قبل في الأصح كمن أقدم معذورا على مفسق مظنون أو مقطوع. So he says, rahimahullah, in the previously mentioned examples, if a narrator is described by the likes of Imam al-Shafi'i radiallahu anhu, Imam al-Shafi'i, because this is the Shafi'i madhab, as reliable, if he's described by someone like Imam al-Shafi'i as reliable, then we accept their narration. I'll do the rest of the translation. Well, let me just actually read the whole thing. If the previously mentioned narrator, meaning the people that are unknown, is described by the likes of Imam al-Shafi'i as reliable, or in a way to dispel accusations, in the dominant opinion, the narrator is accepted. So if somebody like Imam al-Shafi'i says, rahimahullah, أخبرني ثقة, or أخبرني من لا أتهمه, somebody who is reliable narrated to me, or somebody whom I do not accuse narrated to me. We accept that. Why? Because we trust Imam al-Shafi'i completely. This doesn't mean that Imam al-Shafi'i or any of the Imams are infallible. We do not believe in the infallibility of anyone after Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Al-Isma, infallibility, means that it's an impossibility for those people to make mistakes, and therefore all of their actions are a hujjah. All of their actions is a proof in the Sharia. We can't say that except for Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. But that doesn't mean that it's all, hell in a handbasket after that. La, there are people that are mahfuz. So in the Sunni Islam, we call these people the awliya mahfuzun. They are those that have been protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Very unlikely that they're going to commit a sin. Likely that they might make mistakes. I'm sure that Imam al-Shafi'i made mistakes in his life. None that come to mind as a matter of fact, but I have absolute i'tiqad, I have absolute certainty, my belief is certain that Imam al-Shafi'i is from the greatest of the awliya of this ummah, of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I have no doubt about that. As I would say about Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Malik, Imam Ahmad radiallahu anhum, the 12 Imams, the descendants of Fatima al-Zahra alayhi salam, Imam Ali alayhi salam. I have no doubts. As a matter of fact, Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal narrates a hadith that goes through the 12 Imams on the authority of Imam Ali alayhi salam, on the authority of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on the authority of Jibreel alayhi salam, on the authority of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a hadith about the meritorious weight of La ilaha illallah. And Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal radiallahu anhu, he said that this chain of transmission is so pure that if you read this chain of transmission upon a person who is insane, they would be cured of their insanity. So I have no doubt in the sanctity of these people, but we're not going to say that they're infallible. Anyway, I don't mean to get off on a huge tangent. My point is that if somebody like Imam al-Shafi'i, whom we have all this trust in, says that he heard from a reliable person, that means that person is reliable. That's the point. Is because Imam al-Shafi'i is reliable. And that's why the quote that I gave you from Shibli al-Na'mani is so important, is that as we were doing these courses in English, and maybe many of us think in a Western way, which is fine, we also want to understand that there's a distinction. In the tradition of Islam, in the paradigm of Islam, we need to weigh the people first before we listen to what they have to say. If somebody reliable says something, then I'm going to say what they say is reliable. I'm going to say what they say is reliable, even if I don't understand it. Exactly like when Sayyidina Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, the Quraysh came to him after the Isra and the Mi'raj, and they said, "Look at what your friend, meaning Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, look at what he's saying. He went last night to Jerusalem." What did Abu Bakr say, radiallahu anhu? Well, if he said it, it must be true. Why? Because he trusts Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Maybe he doesn't understand at that moment what the Prophet sallallahu said, but he said, if it came out of that mouth of Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, khalas, then it's true. Then whatever he said is true. So this is like what he's saying. If Imam Shafi'i said, I heard from a reliable person, maybe in this context we don't know who this reliable person is, but because Imam Shafi'i attested to his reliability, then he is reliable. Okay, and then he says, likewise, if someone brought forth a valid excuse for acts outwardly considered to be corrupt or a prohibited act. So if somebody did something in the outward, it's a makruh act, or they did something that was haram, but there is some type of mitigating circumstance. So they did this haram act, but at that time they didn't know it was haram. Or at the time there was a dhann, they assumed that this was like something halal to consume, but it ended up being haram to consume. Well, that's a valid excuse. We're not taking into account لا عبرة للظن البين خطأ. We say in Usul al Fiqh, there is no weight given to an assumption that turns out to be wrong. So it's as if it didn't happen. So if I drink something, actually this happened to me one time. We were at a restaurant with non-Muslims, and they ordered desserts, and I like took a spoon and I just went like this. I didn't even eat it. It just touched my lips, and then I started shaking. And then the lady in front of me, she said, well, this has, I don't know, champagne or something, alcohol. I thought you're not allowed to. I said, oh, that's why I'm shaking. I didn't even, alhamdulillah, I didn't eat it. I said, la, I rinsed my mouth out like a million times. I went to the bathroom and spit everything. I was, going crazy. Astaghfirullah, astaghfirullah. But alhamdulillah, I didn't earn a sin because I had no idea. It was totally jahil. I had no idea what I was doing. So if you walked into that restaurant at the moment and you saw me about to eat the thing and you say, astaghfirullah, look at Tariq, he's a fasiq, he's a fajr, he's a this, he's a that. And then you left, and then somebody that was with me says, La ya akhi, and he had no idea, and then he went to the bathroom and he threw up and this and that. Oh, okay, there's a mitigating circum. Maybe I shouldn't have shared that story. I apologize if it was too personal, but it just came to my mind. So, somebody does a makruh act, and you say, well, in his madhab it's not makruh, or something like that. Then that would cause us to accept the narrator in that circumstance. And in the deep oceans of jarh wa ta'dil, you'll find things like that in the biographies of the imams. But the point of view is that these type of protocols we even follow in the modern world, and today, when we deal with the mashayikh, and you might, some people will say, oh, the sheikh lets his murids kiss his feet. And be like, okay, that's not the optimal sunnah, but it's not haram because there's hadith evidence that that people did that to the Prophet ﷺ. So that's like a way of, you always want to find an excuse for those people. Okay, this concludes this section. In the next clip, inshallah, we'll talk about the major sins and wrap up this lecture, inshallah. Okay, next for us is to discuss al-kaba'ir, the major sins. So he says, rahimahullah, وَالْمُخْتَارُ أَنَّ الْكَبِيرَةَ مَا تُوعِدَ عَلَيْهِ بِخُصُوصِهِ غَالِبًا. The chosen opinion is that the definition of a major sin is that which has been specified with an anger/curse typically. So the question here is, what is the definition of a major sin? The typical textbook definition of the major sin, and this is important for you to know, is any sin in which the curse of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or the Prophet is on that person, or there is a promise of everlastingness in the hellfire. May Allah Ta'ala protect us. So, khalidina fin nari abada, whoever does such an act is going to be khalidan mukhalladan in the hellfire. Or there is a specific punishment associated with that crime. So the hadd punishment or the aqab, the punishment is laid out in detail. Anything less than that is not a kabira, it's a saghira. With the exception, as he will say at the end, constantly doing the minor sin is itself a kabira. But let's leave that exception out for a while. So therefore, the way I defined it is that the kabira, the major sin, is therefore something that can be enumerated. And like he will do here, many ulama have enumerated them. Whereas the minor sins, there's almost like a never-ending list of minor sins, and they're not enumerated because it's anything less than the things that we're talking about here. But of course, from a spiritual point of view, anybody who openly engages in the minor sins, it's a minor sin, it doesn't matter. You're on the cusp of entering into the major sins, as he will conclude in this section. So again, the major sin is any sin in which a curse is associated with it, either a curse from Allah or a curse from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, or everlasting damnation in the hellfire. May Allah Ta'ala protect us from all of that. Is associated with the person who engages in that crime, and or number three, there's a specific punishment associated with that crime. Okay, so that's how you enumerate them. And he says, Shaykh al-Islam says, rahimahullah, at the end, this is not an exhaustive list. This is like a medium-sized list, I will say. I think he'll say, I can't remember the quote, but he'll say at the end, or let me see if I can pull that out really quickly, that some of the ulama say there are 70. Ibn Abbas said, Heya ila sab'ini aqrab. He said most likely there are 70 of them. And I think Imam al-Dhahabi maybe has the longest list. Maybe it's like in like the low 100s or something like that. Point of view is that you can enumerate them. Okay, so he says, rahimahullah, كقتل, such as killing. So involve, killing somebody that obviously is haram. ومن قتل مؤمنا متعمدا فجزاؤه. The verse in the Quran, the person who kills a believer on purpose is the punishment of the hellfire. So that's an example of the phraseology in the Quran, is that there is the punishment associated with that crime. So killing somebody unjustly, like not in battle, just an innocent person, Muslim or non-Muslim for that matter. Wazina, fornication, which is having sexual relations outside of marriage, whether the person is married or not, either party, that act is haram. Waliwatin, the homosexual intercourse. Washurbi khamrin, drinking alcohol. Wamuskirin, or other intoxicating substances. So any type of beverage or any type of food for that matter, really. I mean, it's usually drunk, but now they inject alcohol and everything. Anything with alcohol in it knowingly is haram for us to consume, and it's a major sin. As-sariqa, killing, stealing, obviously stealing above the nisab, as we've mentioned before. Wa ghasbin, usurping property, so you just like steal someone's property, whether you're a person or you're a nation or a movement or a colonial movement. All the stealing property is a major sin, because property and ownership and the protection of wealth is one of the maqasid of the Sharia. And when we say it's one of the maqasid of the Sharia, it's one of the universal maqasid of all of the Sharias, of all legal systems, of all traditions, of all religions. It's the right for people to have their property and not have it being taken and stolen from somebody. And namima, which is, al-qadfi first, accusing someone falsely of fornication, which is to ruin their honor in public and humiliate them. And namima, which is backbiting. And namima, backbiting, is spreading information about other people to create a problem. Al-ghiba is saying something bad about somebody else, that they would be saying something about somebody else that they would dislike that you tell other people. So we have two names for the same thing. Both of them are considered a kabira, and Al-Qurtubi says that in the tafsir. أَيُحَبُّ أَحَدُكُمْ أَنْ يَأْكُلَ لَحْمَ أَخِيهِ مَيْتًا فَكَرِهْتُمُوهُ. I mean, such a graphic thing. Would you like to eat the flesh of your brother? Like literally taking a bite out of their back was something that you would detest. That's what ghiba and namima are like. So backbiting and spreading, information that somebody would not like. وشهادة الزور, bearing false witness, going to court or in front of a magistrate or something and swearing something, the false testimony. ويمين فاجرة, swearing a false oath. وقطيعة رحم, severing your family ties. I think there's a hadith here. Yeah, لا يدخل الجنة القاطع. The Prophet ﷺ said, this is in the Sahih Muslim, Bukhari and Muslim, that severing your family ties, meaning your immediate family. I mean, there's a level of family like outside of your immediate, circle that you can't. The family is like never-ending circles. So this word here he's talking about the immediate family. وعقوق الوالدين, or harming your parents. We talked about that in previous class. So Allah Ta'ala says, وَلَا تَقُلْ لَهُمَا أُفٍّ وَلَا تَنْهَرْهُمَا وَصَاحِبُهُمَا فِي الدُّنْيَا مَعْرُوفًا. So do not even say uff to them, which is the least amount of harm. So we said, the fahu, or the increased meaning, the same meaning and the increased meaning is that you can't do anything that would any type of harm. وَالْفِرَارِ, fleeing from battle. فَثْبُتُوا, if you're on the lines of battle, you have to stand to your duty. وَمَالِ الْيَتِيمِ, taking the wealth of the orphans, which is like a really lowly thing to do, especially if you're in charge of them. خِيَانَة, treachery, any type of treachery, whether it's to the state, whether it's to a family, whether it's to a spouse, whether it's to your employer. وَتَقْدِيمُ الصَّلَاةِ وَتَقْدِيمُ صَلَاةٍ وَتَأْخِيرِهَا, to pray before the allotted time or delay praying after its allotted time for no valid reason. So basically missing the prayers and thinking that that's okay. وَكَذِبَ عَلَى النَّبِي صلى الله عليه وسلم, lying about the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام. So these are like people that forge the hadith. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Man كَذِبَ عَلَيَّ مُتَعَمِّدًا فَلْيَتَبَوَّأْ مَقْعَدَهُ مِنَ النَّارِ." Whoever lies about me knowingly, willingly, let them await their punishment or their chair in the hellfire. May Allah Ta'ala protect us. وَضَرْبِ مُسْلِمٍ, harming or striking a Muslim without right. وَسَبِّ الصَّحَابِي, cursing the companions. And here I just want to read this two hadith. One of them is in the Sahihain. لا تسبوا أصحابي فوالذي نفسي بيدي لو أن أحدكم أنفق مثل أحد ذهبا ما أدرك مد أحدهما ولا نصيفه. So the Prophet ﷺ says, do not curse my companions, because if any of you donated wealth the size of the mountain of Uhud, you would not be able to reach what they accomplished. And also in the version of Muslim, لا تسبوا أحدا من أصحابي فإن أحدكم لو أنفق, to the rest of the hadith, that do not curse any of my companions if one of you were to donate the wealth of Uhud, and similar to the rest of the hadith. So that's impossible. He does say something interesting here. An exception to this is Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, because cursing him is kufr. It's not a major sin. It's even worse than that, because it's to violate the text of the Quran, in which the Quran refers to him as the sahib in the ghar, the companion in the ghar, which I thought is a very interesting ta'li. It's very astute of Shaykh al-Islam rahimahullah. وَكَتْبِ الشَّهَادَةِ, I lost my place. Denying testimony. Let me pick up the speed. وَرِشْوَةٍ, which is taking bribes. الدِّيَاثَة is cuckoldry. وَقِيَادَةٍ, or pimping, or can also be desiring another man's wife, which is a grave sin. May Allah Ta'ala protect us. وَسِعَايَةٍ, taking people towards harm. وَمَنْعَ زَكَاةٍ, preventing the payment of zakah. I mean, you understand what these are. I don't have to get into much detail. وَيَأْسِ رَحْمَةٍ, giving up hope in God's mercy. وَأَمْنِ مَكْرٍ, doing wrong actions frequently, relying on God's forgiveness. الظِّهَار, which is to tell a man telling his wife, you are like my mother's back, which is a specific thing that comes in the Quran, which means she is haram for you, and this is discussed in detail in the fiqh class. وَلَحْمِ مَيْتَةٍ وَخِنْزِيرٍ, carrion and pig meat. فِطْرِ في Ramadan, not fasting in Ramadan for a valid reason. وَحَرَابَةٍ, highway robbery. وَسِحْرٍ, black magic. وَرِبَا, usury. وَإِدْمَانِ الصَّغِيرَةِ, and constantly doing the minor sins. May Allah Ta'ala protect us from all of them. These are the major sins that he lists in the book, which obviously would be damaging for a narrator. And with this we'll conclude. Wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidina wa mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alright, so in today's lecture we backtrack just a little bit to talk about moral uprightness and the natural talent. So I really wanted to spend one of the clips, kind of almost the whole clip, the first one, dedicated to that, because it's a concept that is very deep. And we kind of like read it and we keep going, but sometimes it's important to pause on it, because I want you to understand the absolute huge significance of that concept throughout all of the Islamic sciences. And then we talked about the type of narrators that we don't accept is basically when they're unknown. So if somebody's unknown, their name is unknown, we don't know their inner states, so we don't know therefore their uprightness, so that becomes a problem for us. We can't narrate from somebody like that. So those are the people that we don't accept their narration. However, if somebody whom we trust absolutely, like the great Imams, like Imam Shafi'i, the example that he gives, because we're in the Shafi'i class, then if Imam Shafi'i says the narrator is good, the narrator is good for us, right? And we talked a lot about why that's the case, because we care about the quality of the person first, and then what they're telling us second, not what they're telling us first and then the person second. So, if somebody who's known to be a liar, a deceitful person, a lot of these like politicians, unfortunately, that are constantly lying, they're like non-reliable to start out with. I don't care what they have to say. They could tell me La ilaha illallah. I said, okay, I'll thank you, but I don't trust anything that you say, because maybe that statement, I believe in that statement, but I don't care that you said it. I have to find it from a reliable source. I mean, I'm giving you a totally ludicrous example, but to emphasize the point that we care about the person and the reliability of the person first, and then what is said. And then the last part, part of the lecture, is dealing with the major sins. So we learned that the major sin is any sin in which the curse of Allah and or the Prophet ﷺ is upon that person, or there is a text that indicates there is the everlastingness in the hellfire for the person that engages in that act. May Allah Ta'ala protect us. And or number three, that a specific punishment is associated with such a thing. And then we gave a list. I don't know how many is in the list, but I would say a medium-sized list of the major sins with some light commentary towards the end. I kind of just listed them because I think you know what they are. The translation hopefully is clear in that regards. And therefore, anybody who engages in these major sins, keeping in mind that this is not an exhaustive list, would be a damaging on their ability to be a reliable narrator. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Mawlana Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam.